Welcome to the Nick Haleris Show. This is the place where we explore big ideas with people having a big impact on our world. I'm your host, Nick Haleris, serial entrepreneur, author, early morning riser, and seeker of truth and wisdom. Join me as we explore the journeys and discoveries of fascinating people who are literally unlocking the secrets to creating a life of both success and fulfillment. Each episode will arm you with insights, ideas, and practical perspectives on what it takes not only to be financially and personally successful, but also how to start having authentic impact on the world around you. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. For this week's show, we are welcoming my good friend, Hollywood producer Jon Berg. Jon is the current president of production at Stampede Ventures, a former studio head at Warner Brothers, and a creative force behind legendary films like Elf, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Justice League, Edge of Tomorrow, and The Dark Knight Rises. Jon and I met several years ago through our kids' school and became fast friends. Most of the time we hang out, we're either in dad mode or attempting to play one sport or another. But somehow we always end up in some version of a fascinating discussion. I had a feeling this would be a good episode, but when Jon spontaneously busted out his version of the Bane accent, I knew we struck podcast gold. In this really fun conversation, we discuss everything from the writer's strike to evolving business dynamics in Hollywood, to what it takes to be a producer, the art of storytelling, the greatest superhero movie of all time, and much, much more. Now, I wanted to have Jon on the show because one, who doesn't love movies? And two, there's an incredible story here. Jon is a person who literally started from the absolute bottom, working menial, odd jobs in the mailroom and as a messenger, and somehow managed to rise to the heights of Hollywood, arguably the most competitive industry in the world. Now, while Hollywood often presents as this opaque world of glitz and glam, power and big money, at its core are a bunch of passionate, creative individuals like Jon who just love movies and stories. As I listen to him describe what it's like to be on set with a director like Christopher Nolan or sit in a theater watching an audience just love a movie that he helped create, I thought to myself, here's a person doing exactly what he was born to do in life. Jon's story reveals an important truth about success. Amazing things can happen when you do what you feel called to do. I think what we can learn from Jon's story is that if you have a dream and you couple that with some hard work, resourcefulness, creativity, and grit, you can turn a passion into a career. As always, thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoy. Hey guys, this is Nick. I wanted to take a quick break from the episode to share some exciting news. In addition to the podcast, I want to make you aware of some additional content we're putting out. And best of all, it's 100% free. Our Profit Plus newsletter consists of weekly insights about what it takes to find meaning in the pursuit of modern success. This is the place where we explore big ideas at the intersection of markets, business, politics, and life as we seek to empower our readers to have an authentic impact on the world. If you're serious about finding fulfillment amid success, then definitely check out these additional insights. Just go to subscribe.nickhaleris.com. Again, that's subscribe.nickhaleris.com. Now let's get back to the episode. Welcome back to the Nick Haleris Show. You probably just picked up in the middle of the conversation with my good friend Jon Berg.
Hello.
This is a continuation of many, many conversations we've had over the last 4 or 5 years. And welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here on the Nick Haleris Show. I feel like there should be some more signage in here.
Yeah, like we need like a logo in the background and
or like your face sort of Rogan-esque on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're working on it.
Okay.
We're still in the
I can help with that.
Yeah, we're less than 20 episodes, so we're still in. Yeah. So I have a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about.
Great.
But I figured what we could get into first is, we're sitting here and outside in LA around us is the big writer's strike.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to get your take on that.
Sure. Well, I have a lot of thoughts on it. I mean, I'm going to start by saying guilds are good. And as a producer, we don't have a guild. There is something called the Producers Guild of America, which is not actually a guild. So it cannot, as a registered guild with the Department of Labor, I guess. I mean, I don't know exactly how that works, but they're not allowed to negotiate with these studios and the streamers with AMPAS, which which SAG, which is a real guild, and the WGA and the Directors Guild and AFTRA and on, the Editors Guild, and everyone else gets an opportunity to negotiate with AMPAS, I think is what they're called. When a guild reaches an impasse, a negotiation impasse, which they have here, they can call for a strike, and that's what they've done, and their membership has struck. It is incredibly disruptive. And it's, the last strike, which was 2007, I was at Warner Brothers at the time, and it was, it was 100 days long, and I think there was some analysis done that there was like a $2 billion or something massive, like impact, $2 billion impact to Los Angeles. And people are out of work, and, the Teamsters, drivers, caterers, focus pullers, everybody. And what's slightly frustrating to me, so I'm for a strike. I'm for the writers. I have a lot of friends who are writers. I feel like some of the issues are really important. However, what is frustrating is there are a bunch of things. Then I should take a breath so you can ask a question. But there's a bunch of things which are the following. I'm a film producer almost exclusively, and the writers are striking primarily based on television issues. I don't know what it is. I think like 70% of the guild membership are television writers. There are very few screenwriters. So for the screenwriters that I know, they're less enthusiastic. They just have to go along with it because it's their guild, and there's solidarity or whatever. There's unanimity. But it's tough. It's a tough scenario, and things are being, it's hard enough to be a producer. We can get into that a little bit later. It's a really difficult job to raise a family, to have any sort of dependable income. It's all speculative, and when there's a disruption like this, it makes it tougher.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I realized that I totally screwed up the beginning of this because I forgot to tell people, kind of who you are.
Who I am, yeah.
I mean, a lot of people know who you are, but
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I can say who I am. I'm Jon Berg. I'm a producer, film producer here in Hollywood. I've produced Elf and executive produced Wonder Woman and Aquaman, and produced Justice League and Dr. Sleep, and a couple of movies that are about to come out at the end of this year: Ordinary Angels, Space Cadet, and a documentary called Hollywood Hustlers, which has now been retitled to The King of Second Chances for Netflix.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This episode of The Nick Halera Show is brought to you by Metros Capital. If you're an investor looking for direct access to real estate investments, then we'd love to talk with you. Investment opportunities at Metros Capital balance financial returns and community impact. To learn more, contact us at metros.nickhaleris.com. Again, that's metros.nickhaleris.com. Now let's get back to the episode. Yeah, that's quite a resume. One of the things I appreciate about you and our friendship is I've known you for 4 or 5 years, and I actually had to do a bunch of research to figure out that you've been involved in all these titles that literally like a huge percentage of the globe has seen these films. Elf and Wonder Woman, and we're talking about like blockbuster type films. And I read too in my research that you were involved when you were sort of the head of production at Warner Brothers, or one of the heads.
Mm-hmm.
You were involved with some equally large films like Edge of Tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
The Dark Knight, which I want to talk about later because I think The Dark Knight's probably the best superhero movie ever made.
I agree. So I just to be clear, thank you. Just to be clear, that I was involved in Dark Knight Rises. So the Dark Knight, which I think, and I agree with you, is the greatest superhero movie ever made. I was just an observer of that. I wasn't involved with that one, but I was involved with Dark Knight Rises and Mr. Nolan. Yeah, and I was at Warner Brothers for 10 years, and I worked on, as you said, Edge of Tomorrow and Sherlock Holmes 1 and 2 and Argo and American Sniper. And the DC movies were, Joker and movies like that I finished at the end of my tenure there. But I got to work on a ton of movies during a period from like 2007 to maybe 2014, which was kind of like the last, which we can talk about if you want, the last sort of golden period of like the traditional studio system. And now everything's different. Everything's changed.
Yeah, because of the streaming.
Because of streaming, for sure. Because there was a pivot made. I mean, remember that Warner Brothers, opted in 2020 to put their entire slate. As a reaction to the pandemic, but they were moving in that direction anyhow. They put their entire film slate on this fledgling HBO Max, streaming service, and all of these big legacy companies have lost so much money. They've lost their shirts trying to compete with Netflix, and they've redesigned the metrics, or they've adjusted. They used to be sort of subscribership or bust. You could pay because Wall Street was rewarding Netflix for quarterly subscriber growth, even though they were carrying a giant debt. I mean, they obviously have giant monthly revenue also. But there was a point, really, it seems like, where Netflix, where their subscribership leveled off or tapered off and actually fell for the first quarter, where Wall Street completely adjusted and then everyone else adjusted. And now it's about what's the cost to acquire a subscriber as opposed to, no financial soundness or whatever. Like, sort of, it's just you can spend whatever you want into oblivion. That doesn't exist anymore. But yes, in 2014, I would say the studio system really changed. From 07 to 14, all the movies we were just talking about. I mean, I got to make dramas and big IP movies, but smaller kind of action-oriented movies or thrillers or things like that, and those just don't get made anymore.
Yeah, it's watching that unfold has been super fascinating as like a complete outsider.
Mm-hmm.
But it strikes me that the way you describe that, it sounds like Hollywood got caught up in exactly the same thing that like the VC world got caught up in.
Mm.
So Uber, in that sort of same cohort, same time frame, there were a bunch of companies that achieved sort of amazing valuations, like Uber, WeWork, on the basis of growth.
Exactly.
With no reference to like, wait a second, are we actually making any money?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't blame them. I mean, you get away with what you can get away with. So if the financial analysts are saying you're a buy because, you are growing subscribership, but at a certain point, I mean, as we know, there's just sort of laws of physics or laws of economics, or, things expand and then they contract. There is a terminus point to growth. That story doesn't, perpetuate forever. So
yeah.
Yeah.
At some point, you have to make some money.
Yeah, at some point, exactly. You can, but I guess that's a tech, better than me, but that seems to be a real tech story, which is, profitability. You're not held accountable to profitability for quite some time if your burn rate can be really high if you're growing. But then there is a moment where you have to, sink or swim, where the metrics change.
Yeah. And so getting back to the writer's strike. So my understanding at a high level is at the core of this issue is the what we've just been talking about, sort of the economics have changed as a result of streaming. And the writers in particular who work on TV are not getting paid near as much as they used to get paid. Is that basically what's happening? And how exactly is that manifesting?
Yes, you've distilled it perfectly. That's exactly what's happening. I mean, I would assume that most labor strikes are about wages and available work. So it seems to me, so there's a bunch of different issues, like AI is an issue, but there's some of these issues are peripheral issues. It seems that the core issues are, and I'm by no means, I'm not in the guild, I'm not an expert. Right. This is just me reading and talking to people. It seems like the core issue is that in TV, these writers' rooms that are hired, there are fewer writers being hired for longer periods of time for less money. So there's an expectation, particularly a dirty word, it seems, is a mini room, where a couple of writers are hired, and then the responsibility is that they're writing more episodes than they would traditionally. And, in the heyday of network shows, you'd have a large writer's room, and maybe a writer would get one episode or two episodes of 24 to write. And it seems like that has changed. And then so I think it's also about sort of the availability of jobs, because streamers / studios are hiring fewer writers in the room who are writing more episodes, so there's less job opportunities. And then that's part of it. And then the guild minimums, they want to increase script guild minimums because writers are not being paid enough to write these scripts. And then it's residual. So it's there is currently no metric for, particularly in the streaming world. I guess their residuals haven't gone up, even if a show is enormously successful. So in the traditional, again, which is sort of dying, but certainly changing, in the traditional network model, if your show was a hit and if it was attracting X audience, you would see your residual payments go up because that show was a popular show. It was sold in different formats. It had greater value as a property than a show that wasn't pulling big numbers. And in the streamer world, I think, and I'm not a writer, so I'm not getting these payments. But what I've read is that if you have a massive show, like let's call it Bridgerton on Netflix, you're not seeing that bump or spike in residual payments.
I see. Are they cutting the residuals off completely, or they're just not getting the volume-based hit?
I think they're not being paid. They feel like they're not being paid fairly, for in success. So I think part of it is trying to figure out, because all of these different streamers also, they have different metrics. So like, Apple, what they consider a successful show, or a view, even a simple view, like somebody, could be different than Netflix. Like, some of these places are sort of like complete views. Some of them are, you only have to view for, I don't know what it is, what their metric is, 10 minutes. But it's apples to oranges is part of the problem. But it really comes down to, I think, residuals and script minimums, and a big part of what the guild is looking for is that they want, depending on how many episodes there are, they want standards of how many writers you have to hire. So there's a sliding scale. If it's X number of episodes, there's 3 writers. If there's Y, there's 6 writers. So they want the studios and the streamers to be obligated to hire a certain number of writers.
I see. Are you a big TV watcher?
Yeah.
So like these shows like Bridgerton and stuff like that, you will watch those and
yeah. Bridgerton, and I love Ted Lasso and Barry and Last of Us, and I watch a lot of TV.
Do you think that as a result of this shift of the size of the writer's room, for example, that there's been any change in quality, or is it not related to that?
That's a really good question. I don't know really the answer to that. I mean, my guess would be, I think any of those shows that are, big successful shows like that, they probably, I would imagine you are a student of a learned man and a student of economics, so there's probably an economics term for this, but the resources probably go to those shows. So I don't think that those shows have a shortage of writers. I think it's sort of like because those are like the 3% or the top 5%. I think it's the other 95% that are struggling to get on the air, or get a commitment from a streamer to make a season, or they're doing one season or two seasons. They're the ones that are sort of a little bit more on the bubble, and the resources are less likely to find those shows. And I think they probably have smaller rooms as a result. There's less money being allocated to those shows.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like if a streaming company has a winner like Ted Lasso or something,
yeah,
they're going to make sure that it's fully staffed and it's...
Yeah, and also sometimes these shows like Barry, I mean, it looks like, Bill Hader and Alec Berg write a lot of the episodes. Taylor Sheridan with all of his shows, he seems to write all the episodes. So I don't know if Shonda Rhimes wrote most of Bridgerton or not, but I think, anyhow, I think the issue really comes down to the majority of TV, let's call it 80% of the shows that are in development, because, not everything gets made, but the things that are in development, there's downward pressure from the studios and streamers to spend as little as possible to get to the point where they actually want to greenlight it. And then if they do greenlight it, they also want to keep, which is, I understand the pressure, keep the costs down, at least for the writing component. So that's what the Guild, I think, is fighting against.
And how do you think this is something that gets resolved quickly, or is it going to take a while?
I would love it to be resolved quickly, because every day you're reading about, shows in production or things that are where scripts are set, but there's pressure from the Guild. Somebody showed up to picket and protest, and they're shutting down production. So the longer it goes on, the more difficult it becomes to get stuff made. And as a producer, just to go back to that, like my livelihood and, the way that I get paid, but also my ambition, my goal, what I spend all my time trying to do is to get something to go from a conceptual place to a practical place, to a real place, like have cameras rolling. And that becomes tougher.
The longer this goes on, it's tougher and tougher.
Yeah.
On your movies you're working on currently, does the strike mean that the writers are just pencils down, like no one's doing anything?
Yeah. You have to have scripts, which thankfully we do, that are like there. If you have something that's speculative, that needs a lot of work, for somebody to commit multiple millions of dollars to something that's going to get made, end of the summer or the fall, somewhere in there, with a script that's not all the way there, that's impossible. So the rules, and they just came out with something today, because there used to be, I know too much about this nonsense, there used to be something called A through H, which were production allowances. So because as far as the Guild is concerned, script is locked. No WGA writer can write on it, and the script can't change. It's in amber or whatever. It's a fast thing. But there was, in the last strike, there was A through H, so you could change things in production if you showed up on the day and it was raining and you had to change a line of dialogue because one of the characters said, what a beautiful day it is, and it wasn't a beautiful day. You could change. There are certain things you could change, and now they've said you can't change any of that. I have a friend who's a writer director who's making a big movie right now, with thankfully for him, some very funny comedic people. And he was saying that to me, that what he normally does, which makes sense, is he'll call out a line, run the scene, and they'll do it a couple of times. And then if he, thinks of something funny to say, he'll call out to the actor, hey, why don't you say XYZ? And the Guild told him, you can't do that. You can't suggest a line. Like, the actor can improv something, but you can't tell the actor, why don't you say this funny thing? So it's like, anyhow.
Okay, so this is like a real power play. stronger than even the last strike, stronger than 2007.
Yeah. I mean, and it's tricky because again, I'm for it, but 70% of the writers, let's call it, are TV writers, and there's also a big part of the membership that doesn't work, that's not currently employed or currently under contract, which doesn't mean that they're not viable guild members, but it's an interesting phenomenon. I was talking to another friend who's a writer and has a family and has kids in college, and he's paying, they're paying college tuition, and this person's a screenwriter. And he's like, look, I'm with my guild and there's solidarity and all that, but I'm on the picket line, and most of the people, he's my age, he's 50. He's like, most of the people that I'm picketing with are in their 20s. They're TV. They've done, they've booked one or two contracts or one or two jobs. They don't have a mortgage. They don't have kids. They're in a much different position. It's much easier for them to be enthusiastic and to let this thing you asked about time, to let it go on forever. There's no, they're not, they don't have urgency to find a resolution.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's talk about this 2014. I read some time ago a quote in some article. I forget even where it was, but it was Matt Damon talking about how he can't make the kind of movies that he used to like to make, early in his career. Mm-hmm. And it seems like it was related to this switch that you referenced in 2014. Mm-hmm. What is he talking about? And give us the details of that. I'm curious.
Well, and we can check this stat, but he just made a movie, which I actually haven't seen yet, but I'm excited to see, with Ben Affleck, called Air, right? The Michael Jordan movie. And it's, or the Air Jordan story of the manufacturing of the sneaker and Nike and Phil Knight and all that. I think the movie is made $40 million worldwide, something like that. I mean, I think just the economics on that are all upside down, because I heard that Amazon paid $140 million for the opportunity to make the movie. But that's Ben Affleck. By all accounts, it's really good. Ben is a super talent. Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Jason Bateman, Viola Davis. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of other famous people who have gone on, talk shows, and it's out there. That movie. I mean, I don't think that awareness, certainly not here domestically. I don't know what the international campaign looks like, but you'd be hard pressed to not know that it's advertised during the NBA playoffs, which are happening right now, to not know that movie exists and that it's good. And it hasn't done any box office, and that's just because it is really hard to get people to the movie theater. It's not hard to get people, and I went to go see it. I think you did too with your kids. It's not hard to get people to go see the Mario Brothers movie, because it's Mario Brothers, and then there's nostalgia, and it's IP, and you've played the game, and you've played Donkey Kart, or whatever it is, Mario Kart, Donkey Kong. Donkey Kart would be better. And it's made $1 billion something. So there was some analysis I read somewhere, which is just that the bigger movies, Avatar is that,
a Top Gun one probably,
Top Maverick. The bigger movies are getting sort of sucking up more of the box office. More people are going to see them, and the smaller ones, fewer people are going to see them. They're more challenging, which of course there are exceptions. Horror is still a genre that really works well. There was a recent Scream movie that did really well. There's this movie Smile that did incredible box office. Get Out, which is an astonishing movie, did great box office. Everywhere, Everything, All at Once, which is was my favorite movie of last year and won Best Picture. But that movie did pretty well, very well, box office wise. So it's still possible, but things have changed, and they've changed because of streaming, and they changed more because of COVID, and it's just harder to motivate people to go to the movie theater. Not everyone. There's no It's not a monolithic thing. Or whatever it's called, the audience, the general audience that goes to theaters. There are different ethnic groups that go to the theater more, that index more, but it is harder as a rule to get people to go.
Yeah, so there's been a big change in consumer behavior, essentially.
Yes.
That is a decade in the making, and certainly, I've
Yes.
experienced it in with the COVID impact, where
Yeah.
we used to go to the movies a lot. Now, part of it is because I have young kids, and there's only
Yeah.
certain movies I can actually go to, like
Yes.
Mario Brothers, which
Yeah.
was pretty good.
Yeah, it was good.
It was fun, yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think, on the margin, even if I didn't have kids, I think I would be going to less movies, and they probably would skew towards the avatars
Yeah.
and the top
Yeah, you
guns.
want to go see the big ones that are, because that's always been the case. You want to see the ones that people are talking about, and you want to be a part of the conversation. I mean, I do believe also that Hollywood, certainly the streamers, they had an impact that was problematic. But I also think that Hollywood did it to itself. Like, Disney had adopted a strategy which has made smart business sense, although they've walked away from it a little bit now, just because it's hard to commit to these release dates. That's the hardest thing, to commit to these release dates with these giant movies and then deliver something exceptional, because you're under pressure, and sometimes you run out of time. But Disney committed to, we're going to release Pixar and Lucasfilm and Marvel and Disney Animation. And nothing, and inside of that, Disney brand, so like Little Mermaid and, movies based on their animated films, their popular animated films, Lion King. That's all they would release, tentpoles, giant tentpole movies. And I think the audience gets trained. I think there's like a shampoo effect. Like if you have a couple of months or like a couple of strung together films where they're not all just franchises, but like people are going to the movie theater and like, oh man, that was so great. I went to go see this movie, like Everything Everywhere All at Once. And that was such a great experience. And then I went to the movie theater and I saw Super Mario Bros. And that was great. And then on the other side of that, of Super Mario Bros., I saw this other movie that was brand new, that's, Tarantino movie. And that blew my mind. And I think that the juice basically to go to the movies increases, and then you're more likely. It's like anything else. You don't want to go see the Dodgers if they're losing.
Yeah.
If they're on a win streak and they've won 10 in a row, you're like, well, I got to go see the Dodgers.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I do, as a watcher. I'm not a huge movie watcher, but I do get the sense.
Well, you're working out all the time, and you're writing, and you're maintaining an unbelievable schedule. The listener, this man sleeps less than any other human being I know. He's up at like 2:00 in the morning. He's a very disciplined individual.
Yeah, maybe too disciplined. Yeah. But watching some of these shows that were produced by streamers or movies produced by streamers, I do think there's a quality issue.
100%.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, helping to swing people maybe back to the theater. Listen, the streamers decided, and by the way, God bless them, they had a business model that was working. They were spending money hand over fist to have a fire hose of content that they shot at the audience. And they were like, we're just going to win by virtue of the options that we have. And I'm sure they tracked how long, like an important metric for them was how long are people just like flipping through the options on the homepage or the splash page and just trying to figure out what to watch. Like if they spend a half an hour doing that, we've won,
Yep.
But there is a quality issue. I mean, ultimately, that people don't care to finish or come back to watch something that's not very good. And and by the way, with TV, I mean, TV is interesting. Like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Orange is the New Black, House of Cards, Barry, Last of Us, Sopranos. HBO is the AMC Walking Dead was a phenomenon, but like. HBO created a brand, Game of Thrones, a brand based on every year we're going to have something that is top of class, something that's going to be, coffee pot or water bubbler conversation in the office, that's going to be on social. like, we're going to create a cultural phenomenon once a year, or once every couple of years, because it doesn't happen every year. And they've consistently done that because they have a level of quality. I mean, that's why HBO is like a Tiffany brand, which is surprising, by the way, just as an aside, that with the Tiffany nature of that brand, that Warner Brothers Discovery has opted, I think, foolishly, to drop HBO from. They're now rebranding their streaming service as Max, which is short for Cinemax, which is not a Tiffany brand. But I think the reason they're rebranding it away from that is because the CEO, David Zaslav, comes from Discovery, and equally important to him, or maybe even more important to him, is like Naked and Afraid or Dr. Pimple Popper, what's on the Discovery brand.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to marginalize his own business by having an HBO tag on top of it. Or, he'll have to explain when you have him on what the strategy is there, but it seems sort of foolish to me. But quality is important, and I don't look to Netflix for quality. I still go there, but I like HBO, or Max, whatever the fuck it's called now, or Apple. I look to that for quality. Shrinking and Ted Lasso, and I can't remember the Taron Egerton Blackbird, I think it was called, and all this other stuff. Like, there's real quality. You can trust it. And it's important. It's important ultimately because at some point, now you got me going, but at some point, and maybe it's right around the corner, I just assume that we're not going to be carrying 15 subscriptions. I have a Paramount Plus, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Apple, Hulu, everything. I mean, everything. I have them all. And being that there's no penalty for canceling, if you had said to me, I made this joke, there's no penalty, let me finish that thought, for canceling and then resubscribing. Why people don't do it more, why I don't do it more, doesn't make any sense. Like, cancel, don't pay for a few months, wait for there to be something that you're really excited about. By the way, borrow a friend's password. Shh, boo. Oh, I can't believe you said that. Borrow a friend's password to watch one episode of the thing to decide whether you like it. And then if you really do and you want to binge it, buy it for a month, the service, and then cancel it again. I made a joke like 5 years ago. I thought this was really funny. I thought, here's the joke. Netflix has probably done this analysis. There's a A, B, C, D. It's a choose your response. I will cancel my Netflix subscription when A, House of Cards ends its run. B, my D was when I die and I'm no longer making my credit card payments and my credit card gets shut off that it's associated with. That's when I think most people would have said D, like when I'm dead. Like, how could we as a family not exist on Netflix? My 18-year-old doesn't watch Netflix. My 15-year-old doesn't watch Netflix. My 5-year-old does. I don't really watch anymore all that much. I don't think Cody, my wife, watches. So it's not as vital anymore.
Yeah. I think there's something to it. I actually think the streaming model is kind of a dangerous business model. It's similar, to take it to my world, like WeWork, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar to that, where if you give a consumer the option to just disappear whenever he or she feels like it, they might actually do that, which is what WeWork experienced. And that's why their company is, basically going to zero at this point. And that's what's happening with streaming, where if you rewind the clock to the days when we were growing up and you could buy a tape or buy a DVD, there was an added component to the experience of watching movies or being associated with movies and TV, is that you could own that.
Yeah.
And that you tied it to your identity in a different way, where when you go and log into your streaming account, you don't get that part of. It's the same thing with music. When you used to buy records, where people still, and I think that's missing from the Hollywood experience now. If everything's a subscription, consumers aren't identifying with the movies in the same way that they used to, and probably to the detriment of the industry.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I'm old enough to be in this business now since like 95. And I remember when Sony came in to buy what was then Columbia Studios, and there was talk of Coca-Cola coming in to buy something else, and I mean, Gulf Western owned Paramount, and the argument was always that this was dangerous. This was dangerous to filmmakers and to the creative community because these big companies would care more about GE, about selling light bulbs or whatever, washing machines, or in the case of AT&T owning Warner Brothers, I think the biggest component of their business was B2B. I think it was like 60% of their business. That they were more interested in that than they were in movies. And, I think that's largely true. I mean, I think it's, if you're Apple, not that you don't have talented executives working for you who really care about the stuff that you're making, but your primary business is not dependent upon, I think it's important, if you have a chocolate shop, it's important that the company is aligned and pulling in the same direction to make the best chocolate products possible. That should be your focus. And if you're really focused on that and that uniquely, you should have a pretty good chance of making excellent chocolate. I think it's really hard, and I experienced it at Warner Brothers when your corporate, overlord is their primary interest is not in making movies great. Not that everybody has to be focused on that, but if the headquarters isn't, then you can bet that like upper level management at the entertainment division, and I saw this firsthand, they're not focused on making the things great. And then you have problems.
Interesting. Who owned, when you were working at Warner, who owned Warner?
Warner was Time Warner. It had, before I got there was a partnership, AOL, there was that merger. So when I got there, it was Time Warner. It was run by Jeffrey Bucas, who came from HBO. There was a great management structure when I was there. It was, Alan Horn was the chairman of the film studio. So the best boss I've ever had. He's an extraordinary guy. And then Jeff Robinoff was I don't know exactly what his title was, but was just underneath the chairman and ran the film group. And my direct boss was a guy named Kevin McCormick. And it was like, again, it was, things were, there was, Netflix was in the air, and maybe they were shifting from being a DVD distribution company into full streaming at that point. But it was really the final, like there were 5 major studios. Their streaming wasn't a big thing, and those were the golden days, the end of that period. And that period was great. I mean, look, we still had to make hits, and we had to make movies that people wanted to go see, and you had to have great scripts and the right talent in the movie, actors and director and heads of departments, and there were all these things. And then the campaign had to be great. The movie business is a preposterous thing because you're making this gigantic investment, which you haven't market tested the thing. You're trusting the instincts of the people working at the studio that they're making the right financial and creative decision. And then you're launching production, you're spending all this money, but the thing's not going to come out for 18 months or 24 months. So you don't know how the world's going to change, or does anybody want a soccer movie 2 years from now? Maybe not,
Yep.
So anyhow.
In the golden age, in the pre-2014 age, how did a place like Warner Brothers think about that risk?
Mm-hmm.
Did they just accept the fact that they're going to have a bunch of losers and they might get a Dark Knight and a Dark Knight Rises? Or what was the conversation around the table?
Well, there was a much more elaborate conversation, financial conversation that was going on a higher level and with the financial guys that I wasn't a part of. But what I was a part of is there was a P&L statement done for every movie. So there was a different comps. If the director, we were in business with the same director a number of times, and so you would, the director's previous films in a similar genre, films with the same star, and you would kind of look at these box office models, and then there were anomalies, but they could kind of guess, here's what the movie's going to do domestically, here's what it's going to do internationally. They could even break it down further, like here's what it's going to do internationally in all these different territories based on the last movie. And so they'd have some. I mean, it's all smoke and mirrors. It could all go sideways, but they'd have some guesstimate of, here's a low case, a base case, and a high case of what the box office will be, and here's what it'll make in ancillary markets. Here's what it'll sell for in TV. Here's what it'll make in DVD sales. Here's what it'll make in airplane sales. They had the whole financial package. And then when a movie came out, by weekend 2, particularly if it was a worldwide release, they could track from that point. They knew exactly where the movie was going to be like downstream. So they'd be able to tell by week 3 in release, this movie's going to be in $20 million of profit, or $50 million of profit, or $20 million of loss. And it was really frustrating for us, the executives, because there were these future casters. Like, I remember one filmmaker, we actually had a filmmaker attached to Edge of Tomorrow prior to Doug Liman, and his version of the movie didn't get made because these future casters felt like the box office wasn't going to be significant enough. And he said to me, which is really funny, he's like, what are these people? Are they like, this is from Minority Report, that movie. They're like, what are they, these precogs that are just lying in milk somewhere here in the studio that are seeing the future? But they were pretty accurate with their assessments. And then in the low base and high case, there had to be a 10% return on investment.
Okay.
So that they were trying to be sound, and now at the end of the year, having said that, like, they were evaluated, my bosses and me to some extent as the executive underneath them, they were evaluated on, you spent X amount and here's what the revenue was and here's what the profit was. I mean, there's no question they were looking at that quarter to quarter, and I heard the conversations and trying to balance, okay, we have this movie coming out in quarter 3 because we lost, money in quarter 2 because that movie didn't work. But on balance, then I'm going to shut up. On balance, there were 24 movies that came out during the year. 4 of them were acquisitions. 5 of them were movies from New Line. So that's 9 of the 24. So now we're at 15. And 14 or 15 were Warner Brothers, my group. So we were responsible for getting movies into the system that they wanted to make.
And taking them from zero, like literally from an idea to the end.
Yeah, I mean, you literally would walk into my office and say, I have this crazy idea, or I read this article, or what about, which happened, well, what about Sherlock Holmes? Why would we do a Sherlock Holmes? Because what you don't know is that if you reread the Arthur Conan Doyle books, he's not this foppish guy with a deerstalker hat and a calabash pipe. That was actually invented by the filmmakers. That doesn't exist at all in the Conan Doyle. He's a martial arts expert, and he's a badass, and that's the version we should do. So yeah, it's literally from somebody coming in and saying, hey, what about, to it coming out.
That's interesting. The 10% number, I'd never heard that before. It's interesting because it's modest. Mm-hmm. So in real estate, for example, like typical real estate private equity is trying to earn like 15% a year or something like that. Mm-hmm. I would figure with the risk profile of movies that they would have a higher hurdle, like it would be 25 or more.
Yeah, 10% was the low case. So if it was very rare, and again, they would do projections, and then they'd know marketing costs roughly, and but yeah, they were looking for, in the low case, a 10% return, and if it was less than that, movie, they'd circle that and hand it to one another at the big table, on the big exec side of the table. I was on the other side for most of it, where I was, pitching why they should make, Argo and whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you end up like take me, maybe not through the whole thing, but come out of nowhere and end up in such a position like you have in your career?
I don't know. I think I got lucky. I mean, I love movies. I came out here and I worked for a management company rather, and did the mailroom thing, sort of a traditional thing, and then found myself as an assistant working for an executive who worked for a producer, and then got promoted there and got over to Universal and was a junior executive at Universal, and then
How old were you when you were like the first executive position?
I think it was like 26, let's call it.
Okay, so
Yeah.
after college, you're so into movies that you're willing to just work in the mailroom, do anything essentially, or be an assistant.
Yeah,
Wow.
I was a messenger. I'm driving around town. I was an assistant. I was an intern. I was an unpaid intern, reading scripts and nobody does this anymore, but making photocopies of, collating scripts, putting them together and binding them. And, so I did all the grunt work, but I loved it. I mean, it was like, it was an opportunity. There was a step ladder to getting, the next job was always right. You could see the promotion, like, oh, I don't have to bind these scripts if I get that assistant job. Yeah, and I'm booking lunches. I can do that.
Right. But that was the plan. You moved out here from Boston with that intent. You do whatever it takes essentially to be a producer. Did you know you wanted to be a producer, or was it something?
No, I didn't. I just wanted to be it was just Hollywood. I was just like, oh, I didn't quite know what a producer did, but then I figured it out pretty quickly. Yeah. I just, listen, I definitely worked hard. I was persistent, but I got a lot of lucky breaks
Along the way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then not too long into it, you produced this iconic film. How did you end up? Tell us the Elf story, because Elf is like a cultural icon, kind of, in a way. Yeah. It's on the TV every season, every holiday season. It's an amazing, funny movie. How did you put that together? How did that become your first credit?
Yeah, well, I mean, my first producing credit, I had an executive producing credit on this Denzel Washington movie before, but that was my first movie on set, and Elf and all that. I mean, it was just, be ready for opportunity or whatever. So I was ready for opportunity. I read, the quick story is I was at Universal. I was a junior executive. I had brought in, meaning I had sort of acquired the project for the studio, The Bourne Identity. And that's a long story, but
that's another big one.
That was a big one. That was a big one. I mean, I've had some, by the way, the reason I got the job at Warner Brothers is because the guy that hired me, ultimately, Jeff Robinoff, said he knew about it. He was like, you find one Bourne Identity for us, and this is worked out, but when I brought that in, and I found the book and the director and set it all up so that I did my job as an executive so that we could acquire it. My boss at the time was not a good boss and took credit for it and cut me out of the process. And it was really not great. So I decided to leave. I was like, screw this. I mean, looking back on it, I don't know where I had the balls to do this, because it was insane. I was like 25. And I was like, screw this. I can do this. I can produce. I can do this. I had no basis for believing that. But I left, and I convinced this other guy that I worked with at Universal, who was also a junior executive, to leave. And we got a deal with Universal. They gave us $25,000, so nothing, but we got a press release that we had started a company, so we were legitimized. And I sat down, I called, because I was managing people, I called this successful writer-director duo that had I was the junior executive on a movie that they had done at Universal. And I called them up hoping, I was like pitching myself as a representative. And one of them was very kind, but was basically like, "That's not going to happen. Like we're well on our way in our career. Why are we going to sign with you?" But he said, "I have though a cousin." That was like record scratch in my ears, because like everybody's got a cousin or a thing. I was like, "Oh no." He's like, "I've got a cousin who's unrepresented." And who's really talented though, and you should meet him. You should read some of his. Let me send you. This is a guy who you should represent. I was like, oh crap, but I did the work. I mean, that's just like consistently is sort of the truth. I did the work. I got the scripts. I read the scripts, and one of the scripts was Elf, and
from the cousin.
Yeah, and I was like, this is fucking great and hilarious. What a great idea! Great script. And sat down with him for coffee, and I was like, "Who'd you write this for?" Because he had written it a few years. It had been out a number of times, which is not what you want as a script. Like it had been exposed and gone to the town a bunch of times and hadn't been bought. And he was like, "Well, I guess I wrote it sort of originally in my head, because remember, this is he wrote it in I met him in 2000 maybe, so he had written it in like 96. He's like, "Well, I guess I sort of wrote it for like Jim Carrey or something." I was like, "Oh, I don't want to see Jim Carrey as this sweet elf." I was like, what about Will Ferrell? Now Will had been on Saturday Night Live, was like for 6 years. I was like, what about him? He's so sweet natured. Doesn't have a mean bone in his body, but he's fucking hilarious. And he's like, wow, that would be actually is a great idea. That'd be great. He's like, can you get Will Ferrell? And I straight up lied to him, and I was like, yes,
for sure, yeah,
yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
So look, and then many moves later, I did get Will Ferrell attached, and then we set it up at New Line, and it was just it was like an uphill grind the whole time. But lo and behold, we found ourselves with Jon Favreau, which was amazing, and making a movie there. And under the radar too, because Will wasn't a movie star at that point, and we hired a lot of funny people: Pete Dinklage and Zooey Deschanel and Ed Asner and Bob Newhart, like great cast. Jimmy Caan, sad that he passed away, and it worked out. We made a good one. So
how long was it from that coffee meeting to your cameras rolling?
That's a good question. Couple of years maybe.
Okay, so it's a long process.
Yeah,
entrepreneurial all the way. Every meeting is essentially like a new pitch.
Oh yeah, and also part of the reason when I went to Warner's, I found myself, I loved being at Warner's, was because I would go into rooms when I hadn't produced anything. I mean, when Elf came out in 2003, then all of a sudden like I had a calling card. Like people were like, oh okay. And by the way, success has multiple parents. Failure is an orphan. I've had that experience. So, but when you so there were a lot of people responsible for Elf, and I'm glad that I was a part of it. But before you have that, I mean, I can't tell you. I'm sure you do the same thing. I was so I didn't realize how exhausted I was. Thank God I was young. But every room I went into, I had to I had a practice pitch of like a 15 to 20 minute sort of take on who I am and why the people should pay any attention, and what kind of movies I wanted to make, and what my philosophy was. And you just had people sitting like with their arms crossed looking at you. When I went to Warner Brothers, I was like, oh, I get part of why this is such a great job, other than the resources and the legacy and the studio and the management structure, which is all great. I was like, I never have to pitch myself ever. I'm a senior vice president. That's what I started at as Warner Brothers. My card says senior vice president production, Warner Brothers. No one ever asked me, like, what do you do exactly? Like, and what's the company? So yeah.
It makes a big difference in any field, really. In my world, nobody takes you serious until you have made a bunch of money.
That's right.
But the problem is you need their help to make the money. So you have to convince somebody to take a leap of faith on you. And
we're all involved in a heist picture in the first half of our careers.
For sure.
You're just it's a confidence game where you're trying to get people to, I like that guy. I think that's, and then yeah, you get a little success and it becomes easier.
And then people treat you very differently, I'm
Yeah.
sure. And as the head of,
Oh, I was everybody. I was listen, I've gone, there are ups and downs. I'm back to being the schmuck, I think when you have as a producer, if you have a hit movie over that came out a year, 2, 3 years ago, you're like a genius. And, you're waiting to get back there. But yeah, for a couple of years, I was a genius. And put into rooms with interesting people who were like, oh, you got to meet with this Jon Berg guy. But I was no different. I was still the same, moron, but.
Right. Well, not moron, but.
No, well, but the same. I didn't change overnight because Elf was a big hit, that was, but that was an incredible experience, that was incredibly validating to see something that really was like the best thing I can say about that is that it was not obvious. I mean, I had people straight up telling me when we went out with the script with Will attached, by the way, which we had to do twice because the writer had a deal with Disney and we had to go out twice to the town, quote unquote, with the property. And I was passed on multiple times. And some people saying like, not only is this movie not going to work, but this is the end of your career. Like, if you do get this movie made, like Will Ferrell as the guy from Roxbury Guys and Saturday Night Live, like, this is going to end it for you, bro. So, like, there was like one person or two people at New Line who were like, we love Will Ferrell too, and we'd like to make this, but everyone else is like, what the heck are you doing?
That's interesting. And it turned out to be immediately commercially successful, right? Like it took time to build.
It was a success, but I think its first weekend, if I'm not mistaken, it was number 3 in its first weekend. It was a weird one because, Matrix was out, I think the final Matrix movie. And so, like, of course, that wins the box office. And I don't know what number 2 was. But then, like, week 2, we went from number 3 to number 2. And then week 3, which never happens, we went from number 2 to number 1. We, were the number 1 movie in North America, and then it just kept going. It's like we had a good release date, which was the beginning of November, if I remember, and it just played all the way through Christmas, and it played into January. I mean, people really responded to the movie. Yeah, so it was, people didn't know what to expect exactly, and I think they were, that was our advantage.
And as each weekend went, you're out on Sunset Boulevard having more and more fun, or what?
I mean, I would go to theaters. Honestly, the funny thing is, it's an incredible experience. This is a show about lifestyle and money, I think, or I don't know how you build this, but like, I didn't make any money on Elf. I made nothing. Like, the studio made a ton of money. We're in. We have requested an audit. This year will be the 20th year that Elf has come out. I made gross, me and my partner made gross $250,000, less taxes, less commission on top before taxes come out. I mean, we made nothing. We've been paid nothing. We had a deal, for net profits. The studio is saying that the movie is still in the red. It's not in the black, which is impossible. But it doesn't matter in some ways. I mean, I hope we get ultimately compensated fairly, because I think the movie's been incredibly profitable for them, and they've, with merchandise and all this other stuff. But the movie experience of going to the theater to see a packed audience, which I did multiple times, watching your movie and, loving it and laughing, it was the greatest experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then it maybe that one didn't immediately provide financial succce, but it definitely set you on this
launched.
Crazy. Yeah.
No question. I mean, it's set us up for success elsewhere. And as we talked about, like, I would then go into a room and not have to spend 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It was 10 minutes.
Right. Yeah. Slightly less painful. Yeah. And now with all, like we talked at the beginning, all these films, it's got to be easier.
Yeah, I mean, it's, being a producer is a tough gig. I mean, producer is and by the way, we started by talking about guilds. Like, I wish that the Producers Guild was a real guild. It's not a real guild. So we have no residuals. We have no minimums. We have no guarantees. We have, there are none of the benefits of being a part of a labor guild. And so that's really problematic. We should participate, I think, as actors do, and as UPMs do, and directors do, and writers do in the residual component of a movie, because we're as involved. But we don't have any of that sort of stuff. So, being a producer is, you are last to be paid. So you are paid when the thing gets made. You are not paid for the development. There used to be like a little development fee, which was like a $25,000 fee that a producer was paid if they set up a project. It was a one-time fee by a studio, a cost for like covering some expenses of development. You maybe were traveling or meals or whatever. And if you strung a couple of those together, you could at least pay for your office. You could get like a little bit. All those went away. So you are working, as I am, on 30 different things, and you're committed to all of them. And in many cases, you are kind of the hub of like activity on them. Like, if you stepped away, the director's working on 10 different things, and, the studio executive is working on 50 things. So like it would lose its juju. So you're responsible for trying to push it forward. I say the job of being a producer is simply distilled to every day, yield no ground.
Yeah. It strikes me, just knowing you for the last several years, that the role of the producer is similar maybe to a venture capitalist or something. You're out there scouting for like some really interesting opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to put it all together. You got to make sure you have the team that can execute on this on this thing. Got to get the money together.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of time where you spend and there's no immediate return. There might never be a return.
Yeah.
You're just taking tons of meetings. It's very speculative, very similar to what a VC probably goes through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I don't know. I've never done the VC thing, but you're project to project. Your hope, you see it, and there's something about, I find that you have to be, which I don't know if the same is true at a VC, I would assume. So you have to like believe in it. There has to be something about it that you really, you can't, it's part of you. You can't get out of your head, I mean, if you sort of casually are interested in a script, that's not for me anyhow. That's not the movie for me. It has to be something where I'm like, I really like, you know what I mean? It's like part of your fiber, or there's something in it that you just are obsessed with and that you love, and you can't wait. You would just like, if people could see this. So, yeah.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a storytelling craft.
Yeah.
That if you want to be a great producer,
yep,
that has to be a part of your being. Otherwise, you could get caught up in the formulaic business, which is a real business. That's not to say that those formulaic movies don't make money. They probably make a lot of money, but it's not the same as trying to create like a piece of art that you really believe in.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I don't consider what I do to be. I don't. I'm not an. I don't know. I mean, not that you meant it this way, but I when people talk about the art or the work or something, I get a little, it feels funny to me, but I do think a lot about the audience. I'm only interested in making movies that will appeal to an audience. Now, there, on all my different projects, there are different audiences that I'm focused on and believe would go see the movie when it's made. When you go to a movie, the audience watching Super Mario Brothers is very different from the audience watching Get Out or even, Spider-Man, you know? So, but yeah, you're always thinking about sort of the audience and the experience, because it's like, what we do is an experiential business. It's not selling washing machines. I mean, you are judged by the joy that someone has coming to see your thing.
It's a fascinating industry, and I feel like the movie business is America's contribution to culture.
Mm.
So if you think back to the ancient Greeks, they had the tragedy, which was amazing. I really believe people are going to look back and say, what was special about America? And it's this industry. Yeah, it's our big export, right? It's really it's what makes America.
I think that's
memorable.
Largely true. Yeah, it's that and jazz, right?
Yeah,
those are our things.
And military conquest, but that's another.
Right, that's another thing. And the hamburger.
Yeah, the hamburger. Yeah. Well, I could talk about all these movies for hours, but I want to end this with some fun Hollywood questions.
Okay.
That I've been thinking in my head.
Great.
Okay, so let's talk about Dark Knight for a second.
Sure.
Even though you were just an observer on that.
Yes. Yes.
Although I love Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I watch
Bane.
I watch scenes from that all the time. It's phenomenal. Yeah.
The voice in my head more often than not sounds like Bane.
Yeah. I showed
No, Mr. Wayne, I expect you to die.
Yeah.
First I will break you.
Bane, he did awesome. Tom Hardy
he's the
awesome.
best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I show the kids scenes from that movie.
From Dark Knight or Dark Knight Rises?
Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
Because not the violent ones, but the scene where that businessman who's trying to take over Wayne Enterprises is trying to yell at Bane, and Bane is looking at him.
That's a good one. I actually know the actor that played that role. But your youngest son watches horror movies, right?
He'll watch
Annabelle and stuff like that. So I'm pretty sure he could handle Dark Knight Rises.
He can handle the fight scenes. Yeah, there's not.
Yeah.
He watches clips of them, and then if Annabelle's doing something crazy, he puts his blanket over his head. So he's not really watching it, but he's interested in the feeling of being afraid. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's crazy. He's a character.
That movie is really good. Dark Knight Rises, both of them. Okay, so we're talking about Dark Knight.
Let's talk about Dark Knight.
Yeah.
So that movie has so many iconic scenes that are played over and over again, but the one that I think is maybe one of the best scenes in superhero movie history is where the Joker comes into that room full of the criminals, and he's acting crazy. When a scene like that comes in to Warner Brothers, does everybody know instantly this is an incredible scene, or does it not work that way?
That's a really good question. Sometimes I remember reading Tarantino's why can't I think of the title of the movie, the Nazi movie?
Oh, Inglourious Basterds.
Inglourious, yeah. So I remember reading that, and the opening of that was the Landa scene. It was it's the opening of the movie where that wonderful German actor, whose name is also escaping me right now, but he's knows that somebody's underneath the floorboards.
Yeah.
And Christoph Waltz. And you could read it and you were just like, this is going to be incredible. It's Tarantino. Yes, I think you can occasionally read something where you go, this scene is going to be incredible. But having said that, and obviously they cast a great actor in Heath Ledger, and Christian Bale's incredible, and it's an amazing scene. But I would also say that one of the pieces of magic of filmmaking is it is an in the moment thing. So you don't really know what it's going to be until the set is designed and it's dressed and the actors are in costume and makeup and the set is lit and the cinematographer and the director have figured out what the shots are going to be and how they're going to be framed. And until the first time, which is generally in a master takes, you're wide, until the first time the director or the AD says action, and you see, because the actors have a strong idea of what they're going to do, but the sort of the other actors in the scene, they haven't seen Heath Ledger doing his thing, so they don't know what they're reacting to. Then everybody is like in it, and it's like the reality of that scene. They've committed to it, and until you see that first take, and the director or the AD yells cut, you don't know exactly what it's going to be. I mean, you can hope it's going to be great, but that's the moment where, and Chris Nolan doesn't have monitors on his set. He's the only one looking at the monitor, which is awesome. But if there were monitors on the set, as a producer, you could sit there and turn to whoever is next to you and go, "Oh my God, that was as good as we imagined it was going to be, or it's even better."
Yeah. I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it really is about the electricity of which I love about it. It's like, some filmmakers make detailed, shot drawings. They're shot list, and they're drawing every frame of a movie. M. Night Shyamalan does that. Lots of people do that, where they're coming to set, and they've done it with their DP, so they know exactly what the frame. They're really just matching what the pictures were, right? But Clint Eastwood or Ben Affleck or I don't know, Sergio Leone, I would imagine, they're coming to set with an idea of what it's going to be, but they don't. Steven Soderbergh, I think, but they don't know exactly what it's going to be until they show up with an eyepiece and a lens, and they're talking to their DP, and the DP has said, "Look this way, and then we'll move this way," and they'll come in and they'll do their thing here and then go over there. You don't really, that's when that's the magic, where you're like, "Oh shit, that is,"
That's a great, yeah. That's what makes it an art, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, another question, same movie.
Yeah.
And this is more of a question about Hollywood's relationship to American culture.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of that movie, there's sort of a controversial scene or a controversial plot point where Batman has developed this surveillance technology that is essentially violates the entire American Constitution, right? He's like able to spy on anybody's device. And then he uses it for a good purpose, and then he destroys it. Is a plot point like that something that a studio would take seriously and have a conversation like, hey, is this a good idea to portray a message like this about, because it's a heroic moment in a sense, but it's also a morally compromising moment. So just curious if those kind of conversations happen.
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure. I don't think I wasn't involved in a conversation about that, but yes, for sure, there are moments in movies where we would have a conversation about, like, what is the implication of this, and you felt a responsibility. You felt like you could influence culture, not just here in America, but around the world, and people are looking at images that you're involved in, crafting, and certainly storytelling. And yeah, you would absolutely have a conversation if something felt like it was, granted, you want some of what you're doing to be provocative.
Yeah.
And I think Nolan is always like, he's such a master that he's presenting, because that was an early kind of presentation of what ultimately Edward Snowden revealed was happening. And he's always sort of on the cusp of that sort of stuff, ahead of the game.
I think so. I think that whole series actually is, in a sad way, is forecasted where we are in America today, where there's this lawless gun violence for people who are like the Joker in a sense, or like Bane, who they just don't care. They want destruction for destruction's sake.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that as a society?
It's easier to navigate someone who is up to a fairly predictable and kind of what we've seen before, like an ambition for money or power yeah, that's difficult. When it's just chaos, that's problematic.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, a couple more questions. What is a movie that you wish you produced yourself?
That's a good question. A recent one or just anyone?
Anyone.
Okay, well, I'll say like three of my favorites, which are very different. So you're gonna, because in Hollywood you get asked all the time, like, what are your three favorite movies?
Yeah.
Somebody there's a sound of someone knocking.
Yeah, there's someone's trying to interrupt this.
Someone is
question.
Trying to come in. They're like, Mr. Berg, your phone is off. We need you. The president needs you. Joe Biden's on the phone. My three sort of, and it's hard to pick three, but my three would be, in no particular order, Matrix, Unforgiven, and Uncle Buck.
Nice.
So
I wasn't expecting. Uncle Buck.
Yeah. I thought it was thrown. That's me coming with the big hook, the big curve. So yeah, any of those I would have loved to have made, but also I would have to add. Recently, I fell back in love with Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West. And I think for anyone that wants to be a filmmaker or thinks that they may want to be a storyteller or is curious about what film can do, just watch the first 15 minutes of that movie. And there's no dialogue. And it's the most riveting, everything about character. It's the most incredible opening, I think, of maybe any movie.
Interesting. That's a good recommendation. I've never watched that, so I'm going to watch it. And then our next conversation, we'll talk about that.
So you have another question, or can we finish with me asking you a question?
Let me ask you one more question. Mm-hmm. Okay, so going back into your the early Jon Berg arc, did you proactively study storytelling? Did you read like Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces, stuff like that?
Yeah, I did, and I went to took a class in development. I took film classes in college. Yeah, for sure. But what I discovered my ability was, which I did not train for. It happened. Like, I can really remember with incredible detail, maybe a little less profoundly now that I'm older, but like movies, and I didn't realize that I was tracking act structure and like the story components, like, so like a movie is 3 acts. At the end of the first act, there's the inciting incident that throws you into the second act. There's a midpoint where there's a big plot shift. Or the introduction of a secondary villain or some other external pressure. There's an end of second act in all movies. There's an end of second act. All hope is lost for the main character, and generally speaking, a testing of the mettle of that character's decision, and then at the head of the third act, a crisis of confidence that the main character undergoes, which has to re-steel them to re-embrace the lesson that they've learned over the course of the second act of the movie to succeed and win in the third. And they all follow a similar, all stories do, beginning, middle, end. And once I became acquainted with that structure, and I've worked with like Dan Harmon, he's all over the internet. He's a master. He has a story circle, which is based on Campbell's that Hero with 1,000 Faces and the different phases, and he breaks it down even more specifically. But once you get used to that structure, you see it, and then you also gear towards it.
That was brilliant. I was hoping you would answer the question that way, where you literally completely summarized the art of a movie, or the secret art of a movie, in 60 seconds. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was incredibly enjoyable. Now let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Because you didn't say it at the top. All you said was, welcome back to Nick Hilera's show. But what is because you had sent me like a little paragraph or something about sort of the pitch of the show.
Yeah.
But you didn't say it up the top. This is the Nick Hilera show. As you recall, we are, heavily invested in investments and, watching the markets and bringing you a different perspective of what is the pitch?
Yeah, it's a great question. I did record like an intro, which sort of has a version of the pitch.
Uh-huh.
But the truth is I'm still working on it.
Okay.
So the podcast in my mind right now, it's a show about impact.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately what I'm trying to do with the show is to bring out ideas to help people in their lives in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about financial impact. It's about helping people figure out how to make progress in whatever they're trying to make progress in.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, the dream would be if people took information from these shows to not only better themselves, but also, be better citizens, be better family members, community members.
Well, I love that. Well, I would, if I could help you with your storytelling, I would say to you, I'm going to do an on-the-spot rewrite. I would say to you,
I love it.
I would say to you that you are somebody who is endlessly curious, and that your curiosity has led you in lots of different directions, mostly in the direction of self-betterment and education, educating yourself on history, on finance, on movies, on culture, on, all of these things. When you find something intriguing, you do a deep dive into them to really try to understand them and understand the people that are engaged or making differences in those different disciplines. And that's what you hope the show to do as well, is to lead people in the direction that the directions that you've been exploring and the things that you find interesting and that you hope other people will too.
I love that. You should be a producer.
Hey, look at that. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you for coming on the show, man. This was super fun.
It was my pleasure. This was tremendous fun. Sorry for rattling on. And for anyone who fell asleep out there, I hope you had a really good nap.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Thank you for listening to the Nick Halera Show. We hope you enjoyed the episode and would appreciate your help with spreading the word by sharing with your network on social. And until next time, remember, it's not about pursuing success to unlock fulfillment. It's about learning how to find fulfillment in the midst of success.